Hello again. We cannot conclude our conversations about deviance in society without also looking at it from a microscale perspective. So remember, symbolic interactionism is our microscale perspective that looks at you and me level behavior, communication, interpretation of symbols, and remember, body language, tone of voice, all of those interpersonal communication skills are symbolic, or we observe and internalize the meaning of those symbolic actions like body language, tone of voice, those kinds of things. And we learn all of this in our socialization process. We learn how to tell, how to pick up on what somebody thinks about us. Think back to Charles Horton Cooley with the looking glass self. And he says, even in our preparations to go out into our daily lives, we anticipate what somebody is going to think or how they're going to perceive us when we are in that social setting. And so let's look at how deviance or assumptions or perceptions or labels of deviance on categories of people in society can make those deviant behaviors somehow come out of us. So, symbolic interactionism, microscale theory, it's about creation of reality, interpretation of reality, microscale communication. But remember, we don't just stop there. We can't just stop there. We're studying society overall. So we have to see how that has a connection to a macro scale social force. Okay, so there's kind of like two parts to this theory. Okay. So I mentioned labeling theory. So this is a theory that we can use on a variety of different topics. Labeling is the idea that authority figures, people of authority, have an assumption about you, or in your communication with those people of authority, you get the impression that they approve of you or they disapprove of you based on something. So when we apply this to deviance, if through interaction with you and me, I'm your teacher, we have a friendly rapport between us, but I am your authority figure, my department chair, my authority figure, and your authority figure. So if I treated you in a way that implied you were a bad person, implied you were not an intelligent person, you would pick up on that implication. And there is a famous example of labeling theory that William Chambliss, a famous sociologist, looked at a high school, I think it was in Pittsburgh, back in the 1970s, and the teachers and the students were actually a focus of his microscale observations. And he noticed that in the faculty lounge, the teachers would often talk about this group of students and that group of students with very different attitudes. There seemed to be assumptions about this group of students from the get-go that were different than the assumptions they made about this group of students. They assumed that this group was going to skip class and cheat on tests and steal people's lunch money, etc., the kinds of bad stuff that teenagers do. And they assumed that this group of students over here, they were the good seeds, right? They had a different air about them, or there was a different kind of symbolism to the way they spoke, the neighborhoods they came from, etc. And so there were some different assumptions about the goodness at the core of this group, and there were some assumptions about the badness at the core of this group, or at least suspicious that they were bad. And so over time, these students would respond to the ways those subtle messages, those subtle interpersonal communication messages that we get, they would respond to the fact that the teacher assumed they were going to be bad. And so over time, they adopted that behavior as part of their social identity in the school setting. It's called a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you have the idea, or if you get the message that you are bad, or you're the class clown, or you are smart, or you're not smart at all, if you get that feedback constantly from people in your socialization process, it can happen all throughout life, but definitely in the early socialization process, we tend to move toward that expectation, that label. We tend to adopt it and internalize it and make it part of our social identity moving forward. And it affects our aspects of reality. It affects our position within larger social structure. It affects our desire to attain different statuses and roles for ourselves in the future. So read in the textbook about labeling theory and how it applies to deviance and how it can give us a lot of good information where we can assume certain parts of the macro scale social structure based on those behaviors that people are using or demonstrating when they're interacting between people. There's also another interesting theory. I remember being like you in an intro to sociology class, and my teacher talked about the social bond theory, and it talked about, essentially, this is Travis Hirschi is the theorist who came up with this. It's essentially four things. If you have a bond, strong bonds with people around you, and those people teach you to have involvement in socially approved of activities like soccer and cheerleading and golf or whatever, all of these different sports things that are in your extracurricular time, drama and band and all of these things. If you have a commitment to these kinds of socially approved of things, involvement in these socially approved of things, and the people that you have strong bonds with, strong connections with, teach you to believe that these things are important for the overall stability and structure of society moving forward, then as you progress through your socialization process, you are more likely to follow the acceptable side of norms and to work against or disapprove of those behaviors that are labeled as deviants in society. And so it's kind of like Grandma says, if you're running with the wrong crowd, you're going to go toward the way that wrong crowd is going, right? So if you are committed in relationships with people who do not follow social norms, then what's going to happen with your behavior? You're going to probably not follow social norms either. And so that's the premise behind this. It's not about an authority figure necessarily treating you as though you are suspicious or up to no good and you respond to that. This is about the people in your immediate social groups, your primary groups, such as your peers, your family, these kinds of things. If those people have a tendency to follow social norms, well, then so are you, according to this theory. If those people have a tendency to reject social norms and go a different path, well, guess what you're going to do? Because that's what the socialization process is all about. We learn from that interaction that we have on the micro scale, and the collection of all that interaction, according to symbolic interactionists, end up contributing to the stability and order of society, or end up contributing to the inequalities that are present in the structure of society. So it's not just about what do we observe on the micro scale, it's about what does that reveal when we observe the same thing, those patterns over and over and over again across multiple data collection research sets. What do we observe, and what can we conclude about the structure of society from those micro-scale observations? So don't forget to review Symbolic Interactionism while you are reading more about deviant behavior. Text me with questions. Bye.